Today, I thought to present something concerning the notion of ethics now and to explain what is a morality and the different perspectives on morality. Then tomorrow, my ideas was either to chat with you on specific problem that artificial intelligence will raise in the field, or to present myself. That was dependent on different success of this lecture, I mean, on how it is received, and to present some few cases in order to show how ethics, in my view, applies to artificial intelligence. That is the idea. So the outline, I have 7 points, or at least I had 7 points. Ethics as a dominant model of our culture. And then I explain the notion of a dominant form or dominant model. Then in the common sense, the idea that morality is connected to natural law and eternal law, and explaining the notion of cultural survival. And then morality as a social institution devoted to guarantee coordination, and other types of social institution, the origins of values and prescriptions, traditional morality with absolutes, and new morality with only prima facie duties, and then the general idea that we are entering in a new world and the role of ethics in these new conditions. Now, this is, I asked Guido if we had started the recording. Yes,
Yes.
good. Thank you, Guido. Sorry for that, but so. Now, the first point to clarify is starting that when we think of morality, we think we have a sort of folk psychology, which is important because gives us the idea of what is a dominant model. The notion of dominant model is taken by, I show you now even this so you can see better, is taken by Isaiah Berlin, a great philosopher, who said history not only of thought, but of consciousness, opinion, action too, of morals, politics, aesthetics, is to a large degree a history of dominant models. Whenever you look at any particular civilization, you will find that its most characteristic writings and other cultural products reflect a particular pattern of life, which those are the responsible for these writings or paint, these paintings or produce of particular pieces of music are dominated by. And in order to identify a civilization, in order to explain what kind of civilization it is, in order to understand the world in which man of this sort of thought and felt and acted, it is important to try, so far as possible, to isolate the dominant pattern or model which that culture obeys. That is the general question that I got to myself, and I said, which is the dominant model concerning morality? Because this is the most important tract of how we think of morality, of immorality. And in order to make clearer what I mean in this respect, I'll show you another aspect of just a minute, of what Isaiah Berlin says. And he says, consider the Greek philosophy. No, if you read, say, the philosophy of Plato, you will find that he is dominated by a geometrical or mathematical model. It is clear that his thought operates on lines which are conditioned by the idea that there are certain axiomatic truths, adamantine, unbreakable, from which it is possible to, by severe logic, to deduce certain absolutely infallible conclusions. On the other hand, and this is the other point, let's look at another example, a parallel culture that of the Bible, that of the Jews at a comparable period. You will find a totally different model dominating, a totally different set of ideas which would have been unintelligible to the Greeks. The notion from which both Judaism and Christianity to a large degree sprang is the notion of family life, the relation of father and son, perhaps the relation of members of a tribe to one another. Such fundamental relationships, such as the love of children for their father, the brotherhood of man, forgiveness commands issued by a superior to an inferior, the sense of duty, inform the relation. And those relations, to a large extent, would have been totally unintelligible to the Greeks. This is a situation with morality. We have to explain what means morality in our common sense ideas. And when we think in this view, we see that in our common sense conception, morality is a necessary condition to gain an eternal life. Common sense brings us to get this attitude. We even do not realize it. It's a sort of implicit assumption, but we still are controlled by a kind of metaphysical view of the world in which human beings have a central position which is given by the eternity, and our life is a kind of passage in which we have to behave well in order to reach the paradise. This is the traditional view, which in the last decades has been strongly challenged. Of course, I'm very aware that is not valid any longer in a large part of the Western culture. Educated people usually are let's say, less inclined to a religious attitude. Still, this is strong and in a sense implicit, and the dominant model of morality is informed by this, let's say, unconscious attitude. Uh, this happens because the moral world is comes late in respect of the intellectual world. The moral patterns are learned very early in infancy, and they are registered into they are a sort of second skin, and of course, we continue to use them even when we are old. And as Bertrand Russell noted, usually we learn the moral values, the very moral reaction, the basic moral reaction, by the example of our parents or grandparents who transmit us their values, and so the values are at least 3 generations, according to Russell, older. And this happens that our cultural dominant model is full of what anthropologists call the cultural survivals. So this is the first point that we have to consider. For us, morality, this is a basic issue, is something regulated by immutable norms that they correspond to the order of the world. And for this reason, there is a so-called natural right, natural law, natural right, natural law morality. So we think that the moral rules are built in our heart and in our nature, and then this nature is immutable. This is the basic notion. I think that this cultural model, dominant model, is wrong. But we have to be aware of it in order to be able to overcome it, And we have to be very careful because, as Fustel de Coulanges wrote, he was an historian, and he wrote in 1864 a book titled The Ancient City. He said, "Fortunately, the past never dies completely for man. Man can forget it, but the past is always inside himself, because what the man does in any era is what the man is in any era is a product and a result of the former eras. And if we get into its soul, we can distinguish the different eras that we passed and what each of them left in them. So this is the first thing that we have to to face when we enter in our new world, which is a world in which artificial intelligence changes deeply the conditions of our society. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is immorality? Because otherwise we continue to give for granted this general implicit idea concerning morality. Now, my idea is that morality is a special social institution, i.e., it is an organized construction which derives from the social interaction to reach some goals. In this particular case, the goal is to provide norms and values in order to guarantee the spontaneous actions. Morality is that special institution which guarantees social coordination and prevention of conflicts because people act for simply because they are convinced that the action is due and is right, is just to do something like that, what they think they should do. Now, man is a social animal which loves to live with others, and now that we had the pandemic and the lockdowns, we had a very special experience of how beautiful it is to have social life. But so we love sociality as a sort of intrinsic value, something we like in itself, but also sociality is very important as an instrumental value because cooperation between men strongly increases the capacities of welfare and the increase of wealth. So morality prevents the conflict and the conflict between people, which is always painful, and morality gives us norms that allows to foresee, to predict how the other will behave, and so forth, to regulate our own behavior. In this sense, morality is the dominant model of a civilization. And for that reason, it's important to clear the notion of morality as a specific social institution. Now, in order to clarify morality, just before to continue, I would like to have possible some feedback, if at least you understand more or less what I am envisioning. Now I try to distinguish different views of morality as a social institution, which provides us norms and values to coordinate social life in a spontaneous way. Now I compare morality with other social institutions in order to make clear which is the specific character of morality. And that gives me the platform then to give examples in how morality is going to change and what are the different views concerning the future applied to artificial intelligence. But before continuing, because it is difficult to speak in English, and I apologize for my, in the last time I didn't practice so much as I used to do when it was possible to travel, but on the other hand, not to see anyone is more difficult for me to speak. So I would say for a couple of minutes, if you write or say something in the chat, or if it is at least understandable what I tried to suggest. That is, sorry if I want a sort of feedback, but okay, all clear, thanks, Di Pietro. Okay, Pietro, okay. So I continue. Here it is, because if you want, I have a written text exactly, which is in Italian. I don't know whether I can translate it into English, but in any case, I can forward to the people who can read Italian. Now, in order to clarify the specific character of morality, I think it is important to confront it with other institutions, similar institutions. The first one, of course, is law, because law is an institution very similar to morality, because even law prescribes norms and values, but it is different from morality for two different characters. First of all, law is a very solid and hard institution, because law is practiced in a very defined and well visible places like the courts, prisons, there is police stations, and this is the first aspect. Law is very definite. And second point, law is attended and obeyed because otherwise we have a sanction, something painful. And modern law is written and has everything well defined. Any one of us says that if you don't pay the bill, then you will be sanctioned for so much, so and so. And that is what is typical of law. While morality is obeyed for intimate conviction, because people think it is good and right to behave according to morality in a spontaneous way, we obey law because we fear sanctions and we want to avoid sanction. So in itself, law, as it is well known, is not enough. I mean, is not sufficient to regulate a society, because of course the point is who controls the controllers. The controllers should do what they do because it is right to do what is prescribed. That is a limit of law. Another institution which is similar to morality is politics. Politics is, like law, an institution which is semi-solid. Because if you think of politics in part is like law, which has a definite rules, like the parliament, the parties, and what is very well defined. On the other hand, politics is very fluid and flowing in the air, because we do politics in the thousands of interpersonal contacts that we have when, for instance, we drink a coffee, or we just walk to a shop, or whatever we do has a kind of political dimension, but still there is a difference between what are called the political acts, like, for instance, the election of the president of a cabinet or approval of a bill. Those are specific political acts, and the exchange of opinion on any fact, like whatever you can think as a sort of political dimension. So politics has a character which is more similar to morality, because morality is something which has no specific place in which is ruled. There is no house of morality as such, even though now we have the ethics committee, which is a sort of beginning of having a house of morality, but so far we do not have morality is done in a, let's say, in an open space like politics. When you are with other friends getting an aperitivo or drinking a coffee or so, that's in those places when you are on the beach or when you travel in a square, according to how are you addressed or your way of behaving, what you sing or whatever. Those are aspects developing and controlling a morality. Now, of course, politics, like law, has some sanctions, but those sanctions are generally the elections, at least in the democratic states. And so this is to explain why politics is such a strange institution, which has a part which is very solid and defined, and another part which is floating in the air and liquid, and it is difficult to capture. The third institution which is most important to compare with morality, is language. Because language is a very fluid institution. Language has very many different goals and objectives, and language is determining our thoughts and attitudes, and is similar to morality because language is not defined. There is no house of language. Even in that point, we had in Italy the so-called Accademia della Crusca, which tried to determine the correct Italian language. And I know, for example, that in Great Britain or United Kingdom, there is a so-called Queen's English. The Queen's English is important because it's a sort of normative statement, but still this aspect is quite irrelevant. A language is controlled by the speakers, and we can speak autonomously. We have the rule of a grammar, and we apply the language autonomously, and we modify the language, but still, if I had to make a mistake, of a syntactical mistake, of course, any native speaker is ready to understand it and to feel disgusted. Of course, now I speak a second language, and for me it's more difficult, but in Italian sometimes I try to find out some grammatical with the conjunctives and conditionals, or you make a grammatical mistake, and immediately any native speakers understand and react like saying, how can you speak like that? This is wrong. Okay, something similar occurs in morality. In morality, we have rules and values, and when those rules are violated, we feel a kind of discomfort. Here is the point. The ethics, like our capacity to speak in a language, has the capacity to control what I call the spontaneous engine of action, something which brings us to plan courses of action. And this is the most important point in a society, because this is connected with our own identity, and our own identity is what is more precious for us. So morality has that social institution which controls what is of utmost importance for our life. And for this reason, it was connected in a religious society, it was connected to the eternal life and to the going in other places. Now, how from what do come the moral norms and the moral values? are they given objectively or not? Now, even the rules of language are not invented by us. We do not invent the rules of Italian or the rules of English. We received from the past, and those rules last even after we die. So we have, each of us has a style, a linguistic style, and each of us speaks in a personal way. But all of us respect the rules of the language. Something similar occurs with morality. We sometimes invent new words, we invent new syntactical structures, but and maybe we propose to our native speaker, and some have success and spread in the language, some dies. Something similar occurs with morality. The moral prophets are those like, for example, Gandhi, like Bertrand Russell, like Martin Luther King. The moral prophets are those who propose, who suggest new moral values, and this is the point, that morality must be shared with other people and approved by other people, because morality is spontaneous. So we have to convince people, and no one has a control of morality, like no one has a control of a language. That is what is most important. And here is a characteristic of what I call the fluid institution, because the strong institution, the solid institution, can be changed by an act of government. The fluid institution change more slowly. For instance, you can have the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, but you can't change. I mean, the French Revolution changes the form of government, but of course, the French language still didn't change, and the values are still ongoing. Think, for example, of a sort of equality, because we still the equality has been announced in the French Revolution, but still is waiting to be applied. So it takes time before equality is really a shared value in a whole society. At this point, I have a parenthesis, a remark which might become important. I don't know exactly, but if in general it is true that no one has a control of a language and no one has a control of a morality, because language and morality are shared among the citizens. That was at least in the tradition, but nowadays there is something which is going to change, because television is a very powerful instrument that controls the language of a nation. in Italy, it has been the most powerful instrument of linguistic unity. On the other hand, we have advertising, which changes our attitudes and becomes a kind of substitute of morality. Or at least advertising is transmitting moral values and empowering moral values very strongly. I invite you to look at the advertising. They are very, very philosophical. They don't sell anymore things as used to be, but they are transmitting utmost important values. And anytime they are full of are full of reference to what is, for instance, happiness, how to be charmful, and so forth. So I think the new instruments of mass media have a special relevance to morality. Now, the point concerning morality, now I come to the point. The idea that morality is a special social institution, as I tried to suggest, it's a shared notion. The point which is critical, controversial, is about the foundation of morality. How morality is grounded. This is the idea. And on this point, there are two different and opposite perspectives. Now, let's say, just another minute of resting. Is it still clear up to now? I try to confront, and I come now to the last point before entering in the proposal. Now I tried to present and to confront morality with other similar institutions, and I try to see what are some of the problems connected with technologies, because morality didn't change quickly. Now we can have technologies which can change morality as well as language and our way of speaking. Okay, I hope that I think I have still 20 minutes of to speak in order to reach to the end. And if you have any question, any clarification on what I tried to say, you can try to write in. Thank you for Maria, who said that she understood. And in any case, if you have any question, you try to write, and I see to respond. Now, so great. It's very precious. Now, what are the two perspectives on morality? Here is from where do values come? This is the basic question. From where do moral values and moral prescriptions, moral norms come? This is the issue. Here we have two different ways, two different perspectives. The traditional perspective says that ethics is the evaluative or prescriptive aspect of the being. There is the being, in Italian, l'essere, there is the being, and the value, the moral value, is a face, an aspect of the being. And there is another aspect which is the beautiful. That doctrine has been synthesized, expressed by the Brocardo, ens bonum et pulchrum in unum convertuntur. That is in Latin. I try now to translate in English. Truth, good, and beautiful in one converge. The three aspects are three faces of the same thing, which is the being. And the being is studied by metaphysics. So what is good is given. Is good is the fullness of being, the fullness of what there is. And on the other hand, for that reason, having being is equal with being beautiful and being good. And this is an important issue because, for instance, we think that when something is beautiful, being beautiful is also being good. And being beautiful means being healthy, in a sense of healthy as having the fullness of life and the fullness of being. This is the traditional medieval and metaphysical notion, which is still implicit in our view. Now, just to speak about the issue, think that Immanuel Kant, in some sense, is still in this line of thinking when he proposes that in his three critics, the critics of pure reasons is about the ends or what is true. The critic of practical reason is about the bonum, the morality, and the critics of judgment is about the beautiful. So Kant changed the transcendentally, this not transcendent, but transcendentality, which, according to medieval perspective or metaphysical perspective, it was concerning the being. Now it is concerning the reasons, but it is similar. And that is important for me because it shows how slow is a moral change and possibly how cultural survivals remain and transmit slowly in the new notions. Now, this is a traditional view of a value. Then more recent view states that the value, any value, even moral values, depends on evaluation. I mean, on the liking or disliking or aversion of some sentient being for something. Usually, when we think of morality, we think of human beings. But this is the point. Maybe we have to enlarge, to widen up our notion and consider all the sentient beings, i.e., the beings which are able to feel pleasure and pain. This is the idea. What is good? Good is what is appreciated or averse by some being. And in this sense, even non-human animals with cerebral cortex are included in moral sentience. And this is a strong enlargement of morality, and possibly something that we have to consider. The world in itself, the being in itself, is silent, mute, and inert, and dead. Now, the being in itself is neither good nor bad. What is good is, Amleto said, thinking. I would say feeling. There is no, Amleto says in a very famous passage, there is no bad and good in the world, but thinking makes it so. No, it's not thinking, it's feeling that makes it so. Now, who is able to feel something? This is a philosophical and practical problem. Are trees or plants able to feel or not? I know so far as my English competence is that in English there is a very sharp distinction between trees or plants and crops. Crops are the most elementary forms of vegetative life, like algae or mushrooms. I mean, while trees are the big construction. Now, some people think that trees or plants have a sort of system which connects each other, and they are able to have forms of feeling. I am very doubtful about that. But still, I mention the position because it is important to consider. Certainly mammalians or birds with a cerebral cortex are able to feel pain and pleasure. And so they are at least moral patients in the sense that they are to be considered as object of moral actions because they feel pain, and so there is a duty to diminish the pain in the world. The other point is, are there extraterrestrial beings able to to feel pain or sort of to feel something and then to produce values or not? And are there metaphysical beings like the angels? And in the last, this is the last question. Is it possible to think that in the future we will have human artifacts, robots, computers, able to feel something? Now, certainly we have computers able to make calculations better than our humans. And of course, tomorrow we'll discuss about these possibilities, and you are more experts than I am about all these things. But the point is, will become able to have form or feelings? Because in that case, even robots will be, let's say, artifacts or producer of values, and they will deserve special attention for that. So here we have two different perspectives in morality. But there is also, and this is the last point, there is also another difference. Because in the traditional view, not only values and precepts and prescriptions and norms derives from being, but in traditional perspective, the morality includes some absolute prohibitions, where it is important to make clear that absolute means that they do not admit any exception for any kind of reason. In Latin, it is told that they are applied semper et pro semper. I mean, in any circumstances. Absolute means abiding by any circumstances. And I remind you that Kant, Immanuel Kant, said that the moral imperative is categorical. And saying categorical is another way of saying absolute. In this sense, the morality, I go back again to the same point, is immutable, eternal, because man has been created in a certain way, it doesn't change. And so the social life is ruled by rules and norms which are absolute, and the absoluteness, the absolute of moral norms is in a sense the shadow of the absolute of God. This is the idea. On the other part, according to the new way of considering morality, morality has no absolutes. Morality has only, here I introduce a new concept, has only duties or prohibition which are prima facie. Prima facie, it is a Latin term, prima facie, F-A-C-I-E. Prima facie means at first sight, in first instance. It might be that at the beginning we think that something is absolute, but then that we have to do it, but then we have to consider whether there are other claims which are more important. and then they need to have the precedence. Let's take an example, and I take the example. We have a duty not to lie, not to give something which is false. We have a duty to tell the truth. Is this duty an absolute duty, or is it a prima facie duty? I take this example because Immanuel Kant discussed the issue. And Kant said in a 4-page paper, very beautiful, that a man must never, ought never to lie. Never. For any reason. Not to lie is an absolute duty. You have always the duty to tell the truth. Now, I would ask you, of course, we cannot interact today. Hopefully, we do it tomorrow, but today we can't interact. But anyway, is it possible? Is it true that we should never lie? Or are there some circumstances in which we ought to lie? This is a real problem. Of course, it is not difficult to find out some cases in which a good lie is good. For instance, a classical example is that if in mid-40s, 44, in Italy, when the Nazis try to get Jewish children to bring them in extermination camps, in the lagers. Now, in that case, if you are a farmer and if in your farm you hide 20 kids, and if a captain of the SS comes and says, are any Jews here in the farm? What should answer the farmer? Of course, I think that the farmer should say, no, here there is no one. I never saw any kid in the last 10 days, and that lie could save the lives of the children. And I think it's good. According to Kant, I don't know exactly what he would have answered, but in that paper, he said that lying is always wrong because it destroys the dignity of a human person. I think of the opposite, that the lie of a farmer would increase his dignity. But in any case, this is an example to tell you how it is difficult sometimes to state whether a duty is absolute or admits some exception, i.e. is prima facie, or better. Some people think it is difficult. Nowadays, I think that most of us would agree that lying is a prima facie duty. But some of us still think that there are absolutes concerning reproduction. Human reproduction has been for a long time the place in which absolutes had been the rule, had been the staple food, normal. For instance, abortion was an issue considered an absolute prohibition. And nowadays, many of us, I'm sure, think that, for instance, cloning should be forbidden. And of course, there are proposals for having a universal prohibition of cloning, reproductive cloning, or prohibition for surrogacy, or surrogacy or gestation for others, as sometimes it's called. So here we have the problem. The problem is that of morality. Morality is absolute or morality is prima facie. In order to solve it, I think we have to consider what I tried to say. Morality is the social institution devoted to guarantee norms attended and followed for intimate and conviction, and those norms are aims at guaranteeing social coordination. Now, social coordination changes according to the change of circumstances. And this is the real problem. Now we change, for the rules concerning truth-telling, we change the rules concerning control of human reproduction, because I think that most of us nowadays believe, for instance, that contraception and abortion are allowed and not absolutely forbidden. Now, why this occurred and happened? Because in the last decades, we had what I call the biomedical revolution. The biomedical revolution is the enlargement of the industrial revolution. Now, the industrial revolution is, and I quote Eric Hobsbawm, the industrial revolution, i.e. the process which started in 1760s and is still now continuing, but the industrial revolution is the greatest transformation of humanity, of which we have written documents. This is a quotation from Eric Hobsbawm, a great historian, British historian of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is the greatest transformation of humanity, of which we have written documents. Now, the Industrial Revolution allows us to control the inorganic world. We have engineering, we have bridges, trains, planes. All these things are the result of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, according to Hobsbawm, was the greatest transformation of which we have written documents. The other greatest transformation was a passage from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, when the human beings, joined in the villages. Of that great transition, which occurred some 10,000 years ago, we do not have written documents. But this is the passage between prehistory to history. And after that, now we have the Industrial Revolution, which started to change our condition, human condition, and the biomedical revolution is a great enlargement of the Industrial Revolution, because the biomedical revolution allows us to control the organic world. This is a great passage. We are now able to have genetic engineering, which is a new step in the control of the world. And this is very important. And now we have other new steps, right? Because the Industrial Revolution is going to be completed by artificial intelligence. And on the other hand, we have the nanotechnologies, which are deepening our control of the world. And all of this has occurred in a few decades, and we have new problems because we are changing, our technologies are radically changing our conditions, historical conditions. And then we have to change and to modify the rules of our social coordination. Think, for instance, I used to tell to my students that I am an example, a last example of a species which is going to be extinguished, because I am 70 and I was born as people were born 3,000 years ago, more or less. I mean, no control. I am the third of four children, but I have cousins in which they were 6 or 7, And at the time, I had no prenatal diagnosis. I had no ecography. I was simply born as people were born in medieval ages. That's now the situation of people are completely different, because any child has been registered, controlled, and so many different. We have now different ways of coming into the world. Until a few decades ago, there was only one way. Only we can choose different ways of coming into the world. And that is an enormous transformation in our conception. And we have to decide whether it is better to do something or the other. And now artificial intelligence is going to transform and to enlarge our capacities to a level which is difficult to imagine. For instance, of course, tomorrow we'll speak about application of artificial intelligence in radiology, in other aspects of the world. But let's take one simple example. Now we can write or photograph. Take, for instance, photographs. Usually in the life, photographs or like paintings were concerning a single aspect of life, when one got a degree, when there was marriage, a few photographs. Now, we could live in a world in which every single part of life is reproduced and is conserved. So, if the passage between prehistory to history was a passage from not having written document to having written a few written documents, the most important acts of life, like graduation, like marriage, like selling a house or buying a house, and so forth. But now we have the capacity to have documents concerning everything. And this is a passage which brings us to what I call, maybe I'm not the only one, I call it post-history. Because now the problem is not only to have, to register something, but to choose among the thousands of documents that we have. It's like, I don't know whether in your experience of as a young scholars you have, but I remember when in the 70s I graduated, for me at the time in 74, it was difficult to find out bibliography, because I had to read or to go in different libraries to see if there was a paper or so. Now my students have the opposite problem. They have thousands of titles on any subject, thousands, really an amount, and they ask me, Professor, which should I read? Because of course I can't read. When I was a student, a dissertation who had 50 titles, was a beautiful dissertation. I mean, okay, you got a lot of literature to study, because now it's exactly, the problem is exactly the opposite. How to choose the few real beautiful titles that deserve to be read. And so this is the last thesis that I want to present. We are entering in a radically new world, but when I say radically, I don't say something similar to the change between medieval and Renaissance. No, I think of something more profound and more radical, like entering in a totally new construction, like similar to the passage between the Paleolithic to the Neolithic. So, for instance, in the future, we'll have to control the number of people to allow to enter into life. That is something that never occurred before. So we need a new way of looking at morality as a social institution, because we need a social, new forms of coordination of social life. And for instance, let's take the concept of privacy. We usually think that we have a stable ethics, and we judge the new technologies according to the traditional model of ethics that we have. My idea is that we should have a dynamic concept of ethics and to judge the new technologies according to the new dynamic model. And so, for instance, we have to realize and to acknowledge that privacy is a notion that has to be changed because privacy was a feasible and a sensible concept when we had a certain concept of space, and if you went out of home after, like Wolfgang, like Goethe, Goethe, when he left Weimar, no one knew where he was. And he was a private citizen because no one, after he left, it was impossible. Now the situation has changed, and we have to reconsider how to make a concept of privacy fitting with a new technology. And this is only an example that we have to consider all the other aspects. So when we usually say, yes, artificial intelligence is a help, is an instrument which helps human beings, but wouldn't change the centrality of human beings, I think it is something, a sort of dream, because artificial intelligence is so powerful that will change our own way of being. And so we need to reconsider and to think more strongly on how to value things and to regulate things. I would stop here because it's 16 and 18 to my timetable, and maybe I spoke too long for more than quite an hour and a half. So, Guido, I don't know whether it was clear. I don't know whether people wanted to talk, to say something. Attiva audio coordinatore.
Yeah, thanks. I guess it was very clear, at least to me. Yeah, if someone wants to talk, he or she can write in the chat and I activate the microphone. There are already a couple of questions by Bert Yub in the chat.
Can you read it? Because
yes,
I'm in trouble. We are overwhelmed with data in this era. Prima facie duty in many cases, so many we can prioritize them according to the constant or circumstances. Well, of course, we can prioritize according to values, to what we think is more important up here. Please, speak.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Regarding this question, I think in many contexts and the example that you gave about in the time of war when someone hides.
You have a strong audio.
Maybe
try.
I will reduce.
Speak.
Okay. Like in for this question regarding the conflict between different prima facie duties, for example, the same example that you made regarding one, like being honest or value, for example, the life of others. Or I maybe can make the example more specific. If I am hiding a friend instead of something like general people or children, I'm hiding a friend in the time of the war. So if I decide to be honest, or I value the friendship, example in this case. So
Now, it's not a question of being honest.
not telling a lie, being always honest, not to lie at all.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Or I tell a lie, for example, or I decide to, for example, here I am in front of two choices. Or I lie, then I protect a life, or I say the truth, and the truth will cause the death.
Okay, I try to explain better the concept of prima facie duty.
Yeah,
or prima facie prohibition. When you have a conflict of duties, you have to decide how to prioritize, which one comes first and which one comes later. Now, of course, the decision depends. In any case, you do something wrong. The idea is to do what is best in the situation. And of course, that is dependent on the consequences and how will be the result, whether the result would be better to do one thing or another thing. For instance, if you have to decide whether to save the life of 20 kids and tell a lie, or not to tell a lie and have 20 kids die, killed in some sense, then of course you have to prefer to have to balance these two goods and decide which is better.
How do I decide which is like?
Well, of course,
which one is better according to the, I don't know, utility of the output or the consequence, or?
Of course, in that case, I think I will value utility. And I think that is a duty to save the life of the children, and my character won't be spoiled by telling a lie. That is the reason. So if you change the example and come to an abortion, the situation is similar. You have to decide whether an embryo is a sentient being or when, or so forth. And then you have to enter into details and then decide. And something similar with all the new issues which will come out of of artificial intelligence. I'm sorry, Amir, but you have a noise in the background, very strong noise, and I have difficulties in hearing you. If you can please switch off, otherwise I'll do it. Okay. I'm sorry, but it was very noisy. If you want to put any other question, you can write in the chat and I try to look at the chat.
Okay, for tomorrow, since we had this problem, which I didn't solve, I sent an invitation to all of you with another link. Then I also will send a separate email for the next lessons. Sorry again for the problem.
Listen, I think it is better if they will send us, let's say, some questions tomorrow, because I thought if we could have had interaction, I like to interact with people. And I had been thinking, of course, I had a scheme of a few cases to discuss connected with artificial intelligence. But if they have problems and they want to send them to me, I have a free afternoon and evening, and tomorrow morning I can try to fit them in the lecture. Is it clear?
There is a question from Maria Camilla. I activated the microphone. Yes, please.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to ask why the question on lying is only in terms of telling where the children are versus lying to avoid giving them away. Because not answering is also an option. Now, you may be punished for not answering, but you will not be punished for lying. And it might be very unpleasant. Not lying might come at a cost to you. But it's a third way, at least in theory. Now, it might not be very practical, but at least it's a third way in theory. Thank you, Pastor.
Well, I'm not sure that not answering was a solution, because not answering, sometimes this is a problem of when you abstain from something, with abstaining is equivalent to negating or not. In any case, not to tell the whole truth sometimes is equivalent to lying, sometimes is equivalent simply to abstain. That is true. It depends on the circumstances. In the specific case, if he had told to the captain, I don't know whether there are any child here, possibly that would have been equivalent to a message saying, please, I don't say anything, but you can search, you can look for it. So, in any case, of course, the example is a school example, is a classic example, just to explain the notion of prima facie. But in our life, we are dominated by the idea that duties are absolutes, even though they are prima facie. That was the point. Was it clear? Okay. So I wait for my mail is maurizio.mori at and then unito.it. Yes, thank you. Well, this idea was to tell you something concerning the notion of ethics in order to avoid that ethics is simply something concerning language or so forth. Of course, it is connected with language, but we'll see.
Okay, since there are no questions, thanks to Professor Mori, and see you tomorrow at the next at the new link you just received. Thanks to everyone.
Oh, thank you. Ciao, Guido. See
Ciao.
you later.